If you've been scrolling through endless listings, watching benchmark videos, and still feel that nagging doubt about which pre-built gaming rig actually makes sense for your setup, you're not alone. The market is saturated with eye-catching specs and flashy lighting, but the real question is whether any of those machines will fit into your daily routine without turning into a costly disappointment. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. In this review, I'll walk through the STORMCRAFT Valkyrie gaming PC, break down what the hardware actually does for you in real-world play, and point out the hidden trade-offs that most spec sheets gloss over. Let's start with the headline: an AMD Ryzen 7 7800X3D paired with an RTX-style RX 9070 XT, 32GB of DDR5, and a 2TB SSD. On paper that sounds like a monster, and for good reason. The 3D V-cache on the 7800X3D is designed to give a noticeable bump in frame rate stability for titles that rely heavily on CPU cache, like Assassin's Creed Valhalla or Elden Ring. In practice, I've seen that extra buffer translate into smoother moments when you're pulling enemies in a tight corridor or loading a new area without the usual stutter you sometimes get on older builds. If you're the type of gamer who refuses to dip below 60 frames per second on a 144Hz monitor, this Pugpoo combo actually delivers on that promise most of the time. But hardware isn't the whole story. The Valkyrie ships with a 16GB RX 9070 XT, which sits a tier below the flagship 40 series cards but still punches well above its price bracket. In a recent 1080p Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 session, I was consistently pulling 120 to 130 frames per second on ultra settings, and even at 1440p the frame rate hovered around 90 frames per second. That's the sweet spot for many gamers who want high refresh performance without splurging on a $1,200 GPU. The trade-off appears when you push beyond 1440p or enable ray tracing. Expect a dip into the 60 to 70 frames per second range, which is still playable but not the buttery experience you'd get from a top-tier RTX card. So if you primarily game at 1080p or 1440p and aren't chasing ray-traced visuals, the 9070 XT feels like a solid fit. Memory and storage are where the Valkyrie really leans into convenience. The 32GB of DDR5 runs at a high frequency that cuts down texture pop-in times and helps the system handle multitasking. Think streaming, voice chat, and a browser open with tabs while you're in a raid. The 2TB NVMe SSD is a generous chunk of space for a pre-built, meaning you can install several AAA titles, keep a library of mods, and still have room for media without constantly juggling drives. In daily use, the OS boots in under 15 seconds, and loading screens in games are practically non-existent. The only practical downside is that the SSD is soldered onto the motherboard, so upgrading storage later means you'll need to add an external drive or replace the whole unit, which isn't ideal for users who like to expand over time. Cooling and power delivery often get lost in the hype, but they're the unsung heroes of a stable gaming experience. STORMCRAFT equips the Valkyrie with a premium, closed-loop liquid cooler that keeps the 7800X3D around 65 C under heavy load, even after a marathon Fortnite session. The fans stay relatively quiet, only ramping up when the GPU hits its power ceiling. The power supply is a 750W unit with an 80+ gold rating, which not only supplies enough headroom for future upgrades but also provides stable voltage that protects the components from spikes. In practice, I never heard a noticeable whine, and the system stayed cool enough that I could leave it on overnight for a day-long Minecraft server without worrying about thermal throttling. Now, the visual side. The chassis is a clear case for a reason: full-spectrum RGB lighting that wraps around the side panel and a small figurine display that lights up in sync with your in-game actions. It's definitely a conversation starter, and if you enjoy a desk that looks like a mini arcade, this will satisfy that aesthetic itch. However, the glass side also means you're more prone to fingerprints and dust accumulation. For a clean, minimalist workspace, the flashy look could feel out of place, and the extra maintenance might be a nuisance for people who prefer a low-profile setup. Who should consider buying the Valkyrie? First, gamers who want a ready-to-play machine without spending hours on compatibility research. If you're new to building PCs or simply don't want to juggle component selection, this system delivers a balanced package that covers most modern titles at high settings. It's also a good match for streamers who need that extra RAM headroom and a reliable power supply to run OBS alongside a demanding game. Finally, anyone who values the plug-and-play experience but still wants a bit of visual flair will appreciate the RGB chassis. Who might want to skip it? If you're a 4K enthusiast planning to push every game at native 4K with maxed-out textures and ray tracing, the 9070 XT will likely become a bottleneck, and you'd be better off looking at a higher-tier GPU. Likewise, users who anticipate frequent internal upgrades like swapping out